A flying boat is an unstable system, so you need a computer that can estimate the boat's orientation in space, which is then used to stabilize it in flight in real time. The way I usually explain it is that if you have a Segway, you need to balance it by moving the wheels back and forth. That is one axis. But in this case, for a flying boat, you have three: pitch, roll, and height. On top of this, a flying boat has to handle water, waves, and all sorts of complex hydrodynamical challenges. The Candela has several height sensors that measure distance from the boat to the water in real time, so we can adjust the foil to cope with waves. But the boat must also know its position in space. In addition to the height sensors, we have a GPS, gyroscopes, and accelerometers. And data is fed into a computer, the so-called flight controller. The flight controller gets readings from these sensors at 500 times a second, and from all this data, it estimates the angles, velocities, and accelerations in all three axes. And this is used to change the angle of attack and twist of the foil to keep the boat stable at all times. We estimate the boat's flying height based on the input from the height sensors in the front and the accelerometers at the center of rotation in the middle of the boat. And these two sensors are then fused together in order to give us a height estimate above the mean level water surface, and also gives us an estimate of the height of the waves. So the reason why we call it a flight controller is actually that the system is very familiar to a drone, which you might know of, with 4 propellers. But instead of changing the RPM of the propellers, I simply change the angle of attack of the foil. And this is what I use to stabilize the boat in roll, pitch, and height. Actually, the initial prototype was based on a flight controller I wrote for a drone. The challenge for us was to make the boat intuitive and fun to drive, and has to handle all kinds of situations. Even in rough weather, the system is designed to keep the boat stable and flying. When you pull back to land, the flight controller automatically detects that you're doing a landing, and the landing sequence kicks in. It does this by pitching up the bow and ramping down the height so you get a smooth and dry landing. Another new aspect about the Candela is that we bank in turns. This is done in order to make sure that the acceleration is always pointing down in the seat and prevent any sideways accelerations like you know from a car. This is what is known as coordinated turns, and this is the same thing a pilot does in an airplane. However, in this case, the angle is automatically calculated by the flight controller based on the steering input from the driver. A Candela is actually more complex than your average airplane. It's much more comparable to a jet fighter because it's an unstable system, so you need a computer to stabilize it. As engineers, we're aiming to bring a more quiet and much smoother ride than you have in a conventional boat. As a driver, you just drive, everything else is automated. The flight controller will handle all side winds, waves, and as a driver, you just need to control the throttle and the steering wheel.